Okay, we now have a fully functional Model 304 tiller. We have an electric actuator. They bought, this is an 800-pound static load, I believe, actuator. And I will show you the part number and everything too. So, just as an overview, the tiller did not come with any lifting bracketry or anything like that. You saw me using the pipe wrench and the cheater bar, and my back paid for it pretty severely. So I knew the price of the tiller was so cheap that I knew I had to figure in one of these with the price of the tiller. So that was a couple $100 though. They are not cheap. My idea is that I will use that same actuator for like a sleeve hitch, 3-point style sleeve hitch. So it'll be a dual purpose unit. So I basically just kind of guessed on what actuator to use. Let me show you what it is. So this is a Progressive Automations. It's a PA17 series, 4-inch stroke, 850 pound. This one has a pretty decent inches per second of travel. It's not bad, really. So it's not slow. It's actually pretty well suited, I think, to the application. So I didn't know the original stroke measurement on the original units, so I kind of just guessed. I did do some measurements before I got it. I moved the tiller up and down and then tried to figure out what my retracted length needed to be if I was going to mount to the frame, where the retracted length would need to be, and then what the extended length would be. The one thing I'm not sure of, the way that this lifts is through this area right here, and let me show you. These springs here are there to provide down pressure onto the tiller so it doesn't bounce. And so, with 4 inches of stroke, this is pretty well off the ground. It's, it's 6 inches or so up off the ground. So, in transport mode, it's great. And then when I go to engage, you'll watch this slot right here once it actually hits the ground. And you can see it move there and start putting tension on the tiller. The slot is way bigger than the amount of tension that I've put on it. It does go past that point. I assume that this slot is that open so that it has that much ability to force down pressure into the tiller, but I don't know how you get that much stroke out of this thing and still have it work in the orientation that it's in. And that's pretty much the factory orientation. It's pretty close. There's a really crappy bracket that I threw on there. You can't even see it right now. It's not even worth showing because it's really ugly. But it does work. So I changed the lifting mechanism. Right now the wiring is just thrown up over the top. Not a big deal. Some other issues that I had with it. We were talking about this pulley system here, which is probably the most funky part of the whole setup. So instead of doing a right angle gearbox, they've got a vertical pulley right here. And so you gotta make a crisscross and a flip flop and a this and that. I eventually got it all pretty happy. It required a little bit of bending of this bracket. Most of them that I see are bent right here, so be mindful of that if you're buying a used one. That bracket, or that pin right there is probably bent. Watch out for this roll pin. This one's pretty sloppy. The drilled diameter of the hole in this bar here is too big. I don't know why they made it much bigger than this hole that's in the bracket itself, but they did. So the roll pin fits nice and tight in the bracket. It just doesn't fit tight in the bar. I was also missing this spring. I've replaced that spring in the belt. I took the pulleys off and cleaned them, put them on a bench, greased them up. They don't have grease fittings on them. So I just took a needle adapter and a grease gun and shoved some grease down into behind the seal. Cleaned up this pulley here. I also serviced the gearbox. I didn't take it apart, but I packed grease into the bearings, the end bearing caps here and here. Pop those two off, shove grease in there. I also added grease to the gearbox and made provisions for the vent to also be a fill with grease. So I just tapped in a quarter 28 grease fitting in here. So this is actually a vent piece. I don't know if it's going to be covered with stuff right now or if we'll be able to. Yeah, so up through here, there's a hole. And so what I've done is when I want to grease it, I just thread the grease fitting further past that hole and then it shoves grease in to the unit. And when it's running, I just pull it back up past that hole so the thing can breathe. I mixed a little bit of gear oil with the grease to thin it out a little bit, make sure it's getting lubed everywhere. The chain, you can actually see the chain, or you could see the chain from here. The chain looked like it was pretty dry at the top, so I'm assuming that the grease was just barely down at the bottom here. And now, you'll see, it's pretty close to here. Like, it's probably over full with grease right now. I think if I remember correctly, I put about 2 tubes, full-size tubes of grease in it. And then it starts coming out this shaft hole right here. So basically that's when you know you've got plenty of grease in it. Yeah, otherwise, I think we're going to do the final till of the season today with it. So I wanted to do a follow-up and show you guys that it does actually work as intended. It's a funky little tiller, but it's a heavy tiller too. It is no joke. So we'll go do a final till of the season, and you'll see that the 2000 series aren't just for mowing grass. They do other stuff too. So let's go have some fun. You can see it's a little bit wet to be tilling. We just had rain like 2 days ago and it's been really cold. So ideally I would have waited until it was drier, but even in really thick, wet soil, it does a good job. Well, there it is. The ground's so wet, it's actually pushing out clods of clay. Yeah. Our soil is really, really clay. Really clay-like, so it definitely has to work harder than it should in this stuff, but it does a great job. There she is. We'll see ya.